All right. Good evening. Hello, and welcome to AESA's Wednesday night chat, where I'm here essentially to answer your questions that concern special education advocacy. Many of the people who will probably be joining me tonight are coming from my Facebook group, which is IEP/504 Assistance. And I'm really excited. I hope we'll have lots of comments tonight. And I know there were a few things going on in the group, and I wasn't able to address them before I had a chance to come on here tonight. I've been really busy. There's been a lot of things going on, and I'm really excited about, in general, the direction of where everything is going. Um, so just to talk briefly, so AESA is Arizona Exceptional Students Association. And AESA, don't let it fool you, even though it says Arizona. I practice educational advocacy all across the United States. I have helped people literally from coast to coast, from New York all the way to California, and pretty much every spot in between, along with assisting people and faraway destinations such as England and Canada. And I say Canada, it's far away from me because I'm in Arizona. And so I don't know what it's like there in Canada right now during the winter, but hopefully you guys are nice and warm and are sitting there enjoying an evening with me. And oh, I can't wait to get started. I'm so excited to try out this new platform on on YouTube, because I have been doing Facebook Live videos, and I don't know, I think this will be a much better venue for what we've been having going on. Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and let my people on Facebook know I am on YouTube. And I do want to go ahead and talk about a few things that have been brought up in the group. So one of the ladies had posted a question, Holly, and she said, the school can't force me to allow my 12-year-old son to be in the 504 meeting if I don't think it's in his best interest at this time, can they? So there is nothing in the law that requires your child to be in attendance. Under IDEA, it says that the child should come if they're able, right? But it's not a requirement. They don't have to be there. And if you find it detrimental for your child to be there potentially, then don't have them come. But there are some great ways, and because I really do think this is very important if you have never done this for your child or have taught your child how to do this, which is to self-advocate. Self-advocacy is so important. And even if you don't think they could hold up on an in-person meeting, maybe a great thing to do instead would be to do something like this, right? Like let them record a video and be able to speak, to say the things that they want to say. And then during the IEP meeting, you play the video. So this will allow the team to actually have a chance to hear from your child exactly what they think what's in their IEP and their accommodations that are working for them. And then it also gives you, like the team, a chance to hear again from your child's mouth and their perspective what it is they think they need in order to be successful in school. I think if you can record something like that and have your child, speaking from their heart about what it is that they feel they need, has been successful, and then feel like, what is it that I still need to be successful? I think that's an amazing skill to teach them so they understand how to self-advocate, with hopefully the goal being that one day they're going to be able to do it in person at the IEP meeting. So that's just my suggestion. If it's not something you've ever tried before, I highly recommend that you give it a try. Let's see. So I had somebody just share recently a post. So Christina was saying, I submitted a letter with a doctor's request for homebound services for my son 9 days ago. The school complained that it was signed by a nurse practitioner instead of a doctor, that it wasn't from a psychiatrist. They can't do anything with the letter. They need a psychiatric evaluation and medical records. They need a release for his therapist. They have to send the form directly to the doctor and pick it up. They need a week to have an administrative review of all medical documents. And she says they pushed the IEP meeting for Homebound back a week until next Friday, 21 days after the receipt of the letter. Meanwhile, they had agreed to meet Friday to discuss his absences, and he is incurring while awaiting homebound services. They have denied being resistant, but I feel that they are denying services. They've also called me or emailed me repeatedly for several days. Today is the first day they didn't, presumably because I emailed revoking consent I had signed and saying no to a release from the therapist. They explained that I found out that, I explained that I found out this wasn't necessary, like they had told me over the phone. I am wondering if I should email them to reiterate the fact that I need to address the homebound request on Friday and or let them know that I feel they are denying services, trying to bypass HIPAA, or is this overkill? Should I want to work with them, but I almost feel like they've wasted a month before they've even considered the request. So I do agree that you've had a really tough time. I know you said that you submitted a request for homebound services, but you didn't say who you submitted it to. The best person potentially besides the head of the IEP team is to also get the district nurse involved. And you want to call your district nurse and find out what it is that they need the paperwork to say, because usually there's like specific verbiage that is needed for the letter to be acceptable. And so you kind of want to get the information on what the specific verbiage is so that you can make sure when you talk to your therapist or doctor that you have them include that in the letter. And when they go to write the letter, you want to make sure, again, that and you talk to the district nurse because they'll know this, what information the doctor needs to put into the letter in order for them to, find it acceptable. So somebody there in that kind of health department section of the school district, someone there should be able to answer those questions for you. And then once you have that information, then you can go to your doctors. So whether you just need to talk to the therapist or the medical doctor or maybe both, again, you'll have all of that information at this point, and then you'll be able to sit there and then make more decisions after that and go to the doctor and say, hey, thanks, I need this. This is what it needs to say. This is why it needs to say it. And I really shouldn't have any issue at all. Go ahead and writing that letter for you. I know I have done this several times myself for my child because I have a child out of my surviving quadruplets. I do have two of them who are both medically complex, but I have one who's medically fragile and medically complex. And we did homebound for all the children because of that one child. Anyways, in my experience, that was what I found. You really need to talk to whoever is your district nurse, and then they'll be able to give you exactly what it is that you need to know. Okay, so hopefully she can get that straightened out here soon, right? Let me see. So Trisha here actually has sort of the same issue this evening in the group. And she was saying, can someone please help find a polite way to let this lady know I do not have to give medical records release, or am I incorrect? No, actually, you are correct. You're not required to release the records. Now, what they like you to do is to sign a HIPAA release that they will then turn around and give your physician or to whomever other doctor they want information from your child. And that's the reason I am not too keen on parents doing that. Potentially, you can run into a problem because, say, later on, your child's been seeing a psychotherapist. Well, you may not want to share those records If you sign sort of a blank HIPAA release, which often they'll do that, they won't have you fill in who the doctor is or specific information that they're looking for. No, they just have you like, oh, it's no big deal. Just take it. You just sign it here at the bottom. It's all good. We'll take care of everything else. Well, sometimes, yes, they take care of everything else to the point like you would be astonished. So where I was going with this, so say maybe they found out that your child is seeing a psychotherapist. If you didn't fill in who the doctor was and what kind of information that they can gain access to, the school can, then they'll fill that out. And they may access your child's psychotherapist records and do it without you even knowing. And there's nothing illegal to that at all because you signed a blank release. So I think it's really important that you understand how important it is when you sign these HIPAA releases to the school, and that you make sure you fill them out completely. You limit how long, because most of them do have some kind of date requirement. So you can limit it to say a week, and then that's it. So they have like a week to make the request, and then that's all the time they have to do it. And then I did have somebody get really angry at me actually about that. And I told them, I said, hey, if you can't manage to access it in a week, then you just need to give me another release and I will sign another one. And it'll also be a week. So I said, give it to me whenever you're within 1 week of being able to make the request. And like I said, they were not happy with my response, but that's okay. It's not their job to be happy about it or sad, right? You just have to do what you think is best. And again, I would be very, very specific on what is released. And preferably what I do, I refuse to sign these HIPAA releases. Instead, what I do is I go to the school and I'm like, what information are you seeking? You know, I want them to verbalize to me specifically what information are they seeking. And I tell them I will go to the doctor and I will get that information for you and I will bring it back. And so that's what I do. I act as an intermediary. Now, it can be more costly that way. So that is something to consider, because a lot of times a doctor will write a note for a school and they won't charge you. But if they write one for you as the patient, they'll charge you some kind of fee. So there's just something to consider. Thankfully, I've been very blessed with good doctors for my children, and they don't do that to me, knowing that my children are medically complex. So just watch it and be aware, right? There can be a cost on your end for doing this, but I think it's much safer because you can find out, one, what is it specifically that the school is trying to get to find out about your child? And then two, you control the flow of information. So this way, you know, the doctor isn't just, you know, like, here's all the medical files. No, here's a specific slice of information that you were seeking. This is what I'm going to share with you and nothing more. So Calvin said, what is your opinion on Annabelle in school sports to enter competitions? I don't know what Annabelle is. Anyways, though, I really think that that's what I would do, Trisha, is I would just ask them, you know, tell them that I'm not signing a HIPAA release. What I will do is I will get whatever information it is that you were seeking. If you would please let me know via email what it is, what information are you needing, I will then take this to the doctor and I will get the information for you. And so that's how I would go about doing it. Let me see here. So now I'm checking through my group and finding out if any other information is going on, because I see people posting. I know that it has been a busy evening in the group, but definitely not as bad as some other days. Let's see. I don't know. So they were saying they could not find my live streaming video. So I will try that again and see if we can get them to come find me. I know this is something new that I'm trying out, and I think this will in the end, be a better platform for us. And I'm really excited about this opportunity to be able to kind of have this live, YouTube videos going on. I think it's really going to be a lot of fun. Let me see. Since this is my first one, I am not entirely sure how to help them figure out how to get here. All right, so let me see here. Okay. Okay, so now we're simultaneously broadcasting both on Facebook and on YouTube, feeling extra fancy at this point, right? So I've been able to answer a couple of questions so far that have been in the group this evening. I'm really excited, as I said, to kind of get things up and running. And hopefully we will work out all the kinks between transitioning everybody over from working over in our Facebook group, doing like a Facebook Live sort of chatting, to moving over to doing YouTube. I really do think in the end, YouTube is a much, much better system if we're going to be doing some relatively long videos, because most of our videos tend to run about an hour and a half, but I think part of that is because we are picking up people not only on the East Coast initially when we start broadcasting, but then continue to pick up people as the evening wears on, so that those on the East Coast are really tired and going to bed, but those on the West Coast finally have their children put down and are able to join us for the evening. So I'm really looking forward in order to get things up and going. Hopefully now everybody can find me this evening. This would be great if I can get everything worked out and everything synced. Okay. All right. So as I said, I have answered a couple of questions, and let's move on to our next question until we have somebody who is live tuning in. So Elise joined. Hi, Elise. How are you? Eventually, I will be able to figure out how to share the link to join in on the YouTube live, because I do have YouTube going simultaneously. And then I don't know how to effectively share the stream, but hopefully we will get all of this worked out. Anyways, let's see. So Erica had a question this evening. And she said, okay, so I had some concerns and had my 8-year-old child tested to see if he qualified for an IEP. Well, she passed, she passed all tests with a 95% and above. And actually, we talked about this in the group, because with her passing at 95% and everything, we were like, that doesn't sound like an evaluation. What that sounds like, it's screening, right? So just so you know, because a lot of people aren't aware, a school will convene what is called a child study team. So that's what's required by law, okay? When a child study team is convened, they screen your child and kind of gather information. So they look at grades, they look at hopefully what they should be looking at is sort of social integration and how that's going on. They should be doing, like I said, their screenings in any kind of academic area of concern. And then they meet with you, and then you have a chance to say, here are my concerns academically for my child, and this is why I wanted to see and get my child tested. And so they look at their information that they have on their end, and then they look at your information that you bring in, whether it's medical reports from a doctor or from a psychologist or psychiatrist, or any other information you bring in, teacher's notes, oh, hi, Jane, how are you? Let's see, so teacher's notes, any kind of documentation that's been written, any kind of disciplinary action, any kind of note that's been sent home, any kind of comments on a report card, along with any of the grades on the report card, All of these are things, potentially that you want to include in what you're doing. And that's all to help you sort of build your case, right? Like, I don't even know how else to say it. I kind of look at it as a case, so that you're making this case or argument. My child needs testing. And it's during that meeting that they go, oh, well, your child did so-and-so on assessments or whatever. James, please be quiet. So they will do whatever they need on assessments. And once those are done, then they'll come to you and go, hey, here is what the results were on the assessments. And they'll explain why they think your child is or is not having a problem. And if they determine they're not really having a problem, and you don't really have any information to counter what they're saying, they're just going to go, oh, well, there's no problem. We're done. We've fulfilled our child find obligation. And it is true, if that is all they do, if they are only screening, okay, if they're only screening, they have fulfilled their child find obligation. That was it. So it can be really difficult to sort of wedge a school into doing something. And when you're sort of stuck in this spot in which you can't get them to do what it is that you're wanting to do, which is to evaluate your child, sometimes you do need to seriously consider taking your child to a doctor or using your medical insurance to the best of your ability and go ahead and have them assessed, medically speaking, so that you have some kind of documentation that you can bring in that is a third-party documentation to say, hey, this child does have some disability. It's recognized on a medical level. So now you go back and say, hey, my child should be suspected of having a disability. That's the criteria by law you must meet in order to have the school assess your child. And so bringing this medical evidence in, they should therefore suspect there might be a disability. And at that point, should test. Sometimes people still get pushed back, but more often than not, bringing in this outside medical information will help drive the school into doing the testing that your child needs. So Jane was just saying, good, I don't have any questions right now, but I always learn something when I'm listening. So thank you, Jane. I'm glad that you're learning, because that's what the goal is, right? The goal is to train parents to help you understand, because though I'm an educational advocate, right, I don't want you to need me from kindergarten to 12th grade while your child's moving through school. I don't want it to be you come to me and I fix your problems in this sort of hocus pocus black box, that you bring me your problem, I do something, I stick it in this black box, I shake it, and then I'm like, oh, here, it's all done. It's perfect now. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is explain to you what you can do to go and advocate for yourself and for your child, right? I want you to know what to do, for you to know the law, for you to know where to go for resources or other information for guidance to help push the school into doing the things that they should be doing. So that's kind of where I am and where my focus is, that I want to help educate parents in order to push back. Because I think until we push back, right, the schools will continue to do the same thing. All right. So Val had a question, and she said, I am wanting to request in writing that all data be shared before the IEP meeting. Is the district required to provide parents data that they have on your kid before an IEP if the specific data will be used to determine placement at that meeting? So this one's a little tricky, okay? There's some schools, they really don't like giving you much in the way of data. Part of it is, to be honest, they're just not ready. A lot of times they're pushing deadlines, and it's really difficult for them to get you the information in advance. So it's unfortunate, but that's just sort of how it goes, right? Some states are very lucky in the fact that they are required to give you the information before the meeting. So I believe it's Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly, is required to give you the information before the meeting. Now, here's the thing. I would always request the information before the meeting. To get the school to hand over anything that they will, they should always have the fact that it is a draft written across anything that they give you. Part of the reason the schools are a little hesitant in giving you information before the meeting is because they don't want to worry about you declaring that it is a that is predetermination concerning, like what's going on, right? So I understand their concerns of predetermination, but often these meetings, there's so much information that it's really hard for you as a parent to sit there and kind of digest all this information that's sort of spewed at you at once. And they're always in a rush. I know here in Arizona, it is very common. They'll only give you an hour to do the IEP meeting. I will tell you pretty consistently, like my children's IEP meetings, they were anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours long for each one. And that's because I argue a lot with what they want, but that's my job. I'm both a parent and an advocate, right? This is what I do. So it's a lot if you're going to sit there, and now's the first time that you've seen any of this information. You haven't had time to look. You haven't had time to research it. So I think it's really important if you can get it in advance, even just 24 hours in advance. It's amazing, that you can spend the time reading through a 20-page report about your child the night before the meeting, but you can do it. And I really urge you to read it carefully and critically. Read it like you're grading it for a grade. And often I literally read them in that way. Let me see here. I have a comment on YouTube, and she says, I don't agree with an evaluation of the psychiatrist that the district made. So I asked for an independent evaluation, but I asked for a full IE. Is this okay, or should I ask for the psychiatrist? So, Nellie, just so you know, if you ask for an IEE, you want to ask for the IEE for everything that you had a disagreement on, right, with the school. Like you disagreed that their assessment was correct, okay? So you want to ask for an IEE for that, plus anything that they did that, anything that they didn't do that you felt like they should have done. So say your child has sensory issues, but they didn't assess your child for sensory. So if they didn't assess your child for sensory, the IEE is a great time to ask for that assessment. And I have guidance from OSEP that helps explain that you absolutely can ask for an IEE on things the school did not assess. So often that's confused by many people, but that's completely allowed. And then for the school doing it. So the school did the initial testing and you were unhappy with the testing. Do not let the school do any more testing. Instead, what you want to do is you want to ask the school to give you what is the list of criteria, so that, having the criteria to find an evaluator. And then they should give you whatever that information is. So they should tell you, right, like for a psychiatrist that they have to have a master's degree in, counseling or psychiatry, psychiatric. And then they must have like so many years experience. It can't be anything different from what the school's requirements are for their school psychologist. And so I would get that criteria along with any other criteria the district may have. So some districts have imposed a cost cap. So it can only cost so many dollars, and you have to kind of fit it within that. And though it is possible to go over that requirement, that cost cap, you then have to have kind of a hearing or something and explain why you're needing to exceed it. And then sometimes they'll put a limit on distance, say within 50 miles of the school. That is the whole area in which you can look for an assessor. So, but again, the school district should have all of those requirements and what it is that you need to do and ask for you to find a truly independent evaluator on your own. And I highly urge you again to do so, because I think it's the best way for you to get the most unbiased information. Also, if you weren't happy with how it was done the first time, it's highly unlikely that you're going to find it satisfactory the second time around either, right? So I am linking you the law to what is the independent educational evaluation. And this bit of law should be able to help kind of explain and clarify. And I don't know if you're in my IEP group. If you're not, you may want to join. If you ask in there, I will be able to help you and probably help you find specifically whatever it is that your state's guidance is concerning an IEE. So I hope, Nellie, that helped answer your questions. All right. So let's see. So back to what I was talking about earlier about specific data, right? So when you have your IEP meeting, they don't have to give you the information in advance, but there are regulations that say, right, that the parent is supposed to be an active participant in the IEP meeting. Well, it's hard to be a participant in an IEP meeting when like everybody else had an opportunity to read and understand the information except for you. That's really difficult. And I hate that, honestly, because I know I have found like I'm a slow processor. I might be a very smart woman, but I'll tell you what, I don't think quickly. And it's bothersome to me, but that's what I do is I try to learn and study. But, you know, I only know so much about so many things. And I think most people are like that. So when you get thrown these reports, if you're not used to reading them, you're not going to be able to read through that stupid thing quickly. It's like 20 plus pages. So you want to try to muddle through. Well, one, you want them to try to hand it over, right? You can always ask. They can refuse. There's things you can do to counter it with law, telling them I can't be a fully informed team member to make decisions if I can't get the information in advance, you know, because I need time to digest, read, and kind of digest the information. So if you know, that's one tactic too, because I have told them also, you know, I've shown up for this hour-long IEP meeting. They quickly go over everything and it's like, wham, here's all the information. Okay, well, this is the first time I've seen any of it. I'm not signing anything. I'm not doing anything. Matter of fact, let's just right now schedule a second meeting because I'm going to need this time to look over everything and then be able to think about it, process the information, maybe do some research, and then come back and then have an informed meeting. So usually it doesn't take too long for the school to realize it's just better to give me the information in advance. They don't want me to keep having to reschedule meetings. And I'm cool with that because I like the one less meeting. You know how hard it is to get like 10 people to coordinate a schedule? It's really difficult. So I'd rather just get everything done right then, if I can, if it's possible. So I really like them giving me the information, and then they like giving it to me because I'm like, you know, yes, let's hurry right through this information. I've had time to read it. Oh, by the way, there's a typo. Oh, I have 3 children who are all the same age. I see here you've gotten their information mixed up. We need to fix this. So usually there's all kinds of little things. And then even things like, so in Arizona, there is a state form that everyone is required to use. In the state form, the state law that was cited in the form is incorrect. Can you believe that? It was incorrect. And it was funny because I'm in the middle of a meeting and I told them, I'm like, hey, I looked up this law and this is not what this law says. It's not referencing what you think it's referencing. And they're like, what? No, this is correct because it's the state's form. And I'm like, no, it's not. Here, look at the law. And I shared with them the link to the law. And then they looked and they read it and they were like, oh, I can't believe this. They actually had to file a thing and they had to fix it because it was wrong in the state's template. everybody had been using it. No one had bothered to double check. So it's critically important to please read these IEP reports with a super critical eye. You read it like a technical report, because it is. It's a technical report school has put together about your child. So read it critically as you would any other piece of information you're ever given. So Cozy here said, how can you ask to get the report prior to the IEP meeting? I have never even thought of asking for it. It also sounds like they want to send them to a different school in our district. Oh, so they're wanting to send your child to a different school in your district. I'd like him to stay at his home or neighborhood school. And she said she's in Minnesota. Hi, Jackie. How are you? So Jackie's one of my fellow admins in the IEP 504 Assistance group on Facebook. And she's an amazing advocate, by the way. So Cozy, to answer your question, really what you do is you just ask them in an email. Like, don't ever talk to the school. Like, seriously, your lips move and nothing happens. Always send an email or a letter to the school and just tell them, hey, I would like it 3 days or 5 days in advance. And, you know, it may show up in your inbox the evening before your IEP meeting. And though that's highly inconvenient, at least you got it and you didn't have to fight over it, right? So, hey, Jackie. Anyways, just be happy if they hand it over without a fight. I know that's like, it's horrible to accept, but really, like, seriously, it's true. So if you need to fight with them, you know, do carry that on. Again, there is law, and I can post the law. I don't want to spend the time right this minute to look it up, but I can post it in the IEP group. But I think it's worth it because, like I said, if you can get this information, it's super helpful because it really kind of helps put you on a level playing field with everybody else who's sitting in the room. And then you're talking about they want to send him to a different school. Okay, why? Is it like a behavior school? Or are they trying to move him because they're saying he has behaviors? If so, that would probably be a more restrictive environment. And honestly, that's what you're wanting to look for, right? You want to figure out, is this change in the school, which it probably is going to be a more restrictive environment. And I say probably because you're talking about leaving your home school. Normally, you don't ever do that unless you're moving to a more restrictive environment. So now we're talking about placement and least restrictive environment. And again, these are very important points and kind of terms to understand when it comes to the law. And I've written a couple of blog posts, which I hope people will find really helpful. I take the time a lot of times to write these things. They take me a long time because they are research based in the fact that I, try to embed as much of the law and links and other things that are helpful for you into these posts. So this way you got everything you need. It's a one-stop shop, right, for everything that you need. So please, when you do read my posts on aesa.group, that you take the time to click on all the little hyperlinks, all right? The hyperlinks are what will really help you immensely because it takes you right to that guidance. It takes you right to a site that helps explain it again. It takes you right to the law itself, So I think, and I really tried to make these posts very educational for someone new to special education. And these are called special education terms to know. And there's 3 posts. There's part 1, part 2, and part 3. And if you are not familiar with special education jargon, these posts will help you immensely. And in there, I do explain about least restrictive environment. And I think least restrictive environment is really kind of where your argument is, right? Like, where you're going about why you don't want your child to move. So I do think it's really important to go ahead and look and see what you can find when it concerns least restrictive environment and kind of have that conversation with the school and then see what goes on from there. So let's see. All right. So Shalini says, hi, Michelle. How many speech sessions are reasonable for my 3-year-old for his next IEP or when he will turn 4 in September? I'm trying to understand speech sessions in general. I never knew that speech is usually 30-minute sessions in schools for the most part, and speech is one of the biggest challenges my son faces. He gets one 30-minute session every week at 3 years old. So what they're going to tell you at 3, right? Well, at first, so let's cover like a really important, super important topic. Matter of fact, it's so important that I probably am working on putting together a podcast, and this would make an excellent topic to start off that podcast, which is explaining the differences between medical and educational therapy. So, medical therapy is the therapy you get from exercising your medical insurance. Okay. So it's taking medical insurance. I'm going to, through, whatever system your medical insurance uses, select a care provider and then pay them with my medical insurance and whatever deductible to go and run these tests and assessments and do therapy and et cetera. The criteria for medical therapy is different because when you are doing medical therapy, it's really kind of between you and your child's pediatrician, looking at your child and saying, is there concern for the child that we should have them assessed for speech therapy? And then a doctor says, yes, I agree, there is concern, your child is at risk. Yes, I'm going to refer them to a speech therapist. So you take said child to speech therapist. The speech therapist then does the evaluation. Their criteria is they look at medical criteria. They look at stuff in the DSM-5 or they look at medical billing codes, right? And so they classify your child by those things to make the medical insurance pay if your child needs therapy. The point of medical therapy is to make your child whole, whole, functional, right? Or no, not just functional, whole. They are operating at a good level, right? Across all areas of life. Whereas the school's only criteria is for your child to be functional in the educational environment. They want your child to be functional, right? At the school. By the way, anybody local to me, there's a kitten. You want a kitten? There's a kitten.
Yes, we have a kitten.
We have several kittens, but they're from a wild mommy cat. Anyways, so the idea of the educational therapy is literally to see if your child is functional in the educational environment. So the threshold is a lot lower. It's easier for your child to kind of fall outside the parameters of needing educational therapy, but they would still qualify for medical therapy. Also, another issue that I have with educational therapy is just the fact that in educational therapy, rarely are you ever working. Well, one, you work, like you said, tend to be about 30-minute sessions. You don't, we're medical. So educational therapy, 30-minute sessions of speech. Medical therapy, it tends to be 45 to 50 minutes of therapy. Educational speech therapy. There, your child is probably getting group speech therapy, not individual one-on-one help, or they're working individually, but it's with a speech therapy assistant. Medical therapy, your child is working one-on-one with an actual speech therapist. So I think medical therapy is better. Educational therapy is good if your child qualifies, right? Because then they can get it there and you can get medical therapy. You can get both. And I highly encourage you to do so. If your child can tolerate that much therapy, like school therapy, school therapy, and then medical therapy. as far as how much time, what the school is going to tell you about the 1 30-minute session is that that's all your child needs because of their age. They're going to say it's developmentally appropriate. He's functional at 1 30-minute session a week because he's making improvement. That's all they have to do. Is he making more than minimum improvement? That's the only threshold they have to meet, right? So it can be really difficult to get them to agree to do more educational therapy. So just be aware that you may not be able to argue. The only way that you can kind of argue for more is if your child is sort of flatlined in their progress or they're making very little progress. Then you have sort of grounds to go, hey, we need more educational therapy. But other than that, it would be really difficult to do at 3, okay? Because 3 years old is really young. So just be aware. I would seek medical therapy and try to do medical therapy if you can. That would be my recommendation. And then get whatever you can out of the school. So Jane said, with all the focus on LRE, sometimes I feel guilty that I'm happy with my son's placement in a self-contained autism classroom. You know what? If that's where he's supposed to be, if that's the place he is, and that's where he learns best, right? Who cares? What matters is your child happy, right? Are they learning? If they're happy and they're learning, then you're good, you know? So whether that means they're in a self-contained classroom, whether that means that they are integrated into a general education classroom, whether that means you're homeschooling them, they're in private school, they're in a charter school, doesn't matter the educational setting of your child, right? What matters is your child happy? And are they learning? Because if they're not learning and they're not happy, right, we're not going to get anywhere. So those are the two important parts. Are they happy and are they learning? So let's see. All right. Hi, Karen. How are you? Glad to see that you joined us this evening. All right. So let's see. Kind of go back here to the group. Does anybody else have any questions this evening? Yeah, so Jane was just saying, thanks, you're right? I mean, like, seriously, because if your child isn't happy, they're not going to learn, right? And if they're not learning, they're not going to be happy because they're going to be miserable.
Yeah.
So in order to have your child, you know, if they're happy and they're learning, then you've got it, whatever that is for you. So let's see. James, please be quiet.
Sorry.
All right. And then let's see. So I'm kind of going back through here on the group, and I'm on YouTube for those of you who don't realize it. So I know I'm simulcasting essentially, right? Both in Facebook and on YouTube, as we're trying to get people to transition over to YouTube, because I think it's really a better platform if we're going to do videos is to do them in YouTube than in trying to continue to do them in Facebook. And I've been running into several problems with Facebook lately. I don't know, it's still been glitching ever since that last day a few weeks ago now, right? I'm still having little glitches. It's very weird. So Julie says, Michelle, what kind of accommodations can I get for my son who is parent pickup and drop off? So what do you mean as far as what kind of accommodations? Are you talking about like during that transition time of picking him up and dropping him off? You know, are you talking about like getting some kind of aid or something to make sure that they get safely to the car and get into the car? Are you having problems with them getting into the car or getting out of the car? I've heard of people who are like, I've had to shove my child into the car and then I arrive at school and pretty much have to wedge them out. Normally, if that happens, it means your child is having really high anxiety issues and school refusal. And if that's going on, yes, there are definitely lots of accommodations that you can get to sort of address that. Let's see. So Julie was saying that he is a safety issue. Is he a runner? That would be something very important to address. And she said he will walk into traffic. So yes, an aid or getting out and walking in. And she said, keep him from walking into the road. So if you have any kind of documentation to prove that he is a safety risk, right, then yes, you should be able to get an aid. And I don't know if you have any kind of documentation like that. I don't know if you have anything from a doctor. I know I have mentioned before. So she says he's a runner with no realization of danger. I have one of those. Thankfully, at 11, she's pretty much outgrown that. But there is a medical diagnostic code for wandering. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but that may be something that you want to talk to your doctor and add into your child's medical records. And again, I have that information. I know I've posted it in the group. And I can post it again if you can't find it. I'm sitting here thinking it's like #wondering, but I can post that information again. But the reason I like putting it into the medical records is, one, in case somebody calls CPS on you because your child has run off. I had that happen myself. So it happens to a lot of people, and it literally takes like a hot 2 seconds or something, and your child is gone. And I think it's really great to have that backed up, that, this is a known concern. You were already concerned and aware. You've already talked to your doctor about it. So I think that's why it's kind of good to have that medical diagnostic code. Also, then now you can have the medical doctor say, hey, yes, it is an ICD-10 code. And I'll give that to you in just a little bit. But anyways, by having it in there, now you can have the doctor. Now the doctor has say, right? Because the doctor's made a medical diagnosis. Your child is a wanderer. And so they can write a note and say, your child has been medically documented to have a problem with wandering, and they are unaware of danger to themselves and to others. And so therefore, your child needs to be supervised in situations where they may be harmed. And I think that could help kind of push between that and a letter requesting it, plus any kind of write-up about incidences, because I'm assuming, since you're asking, you probably have had some issues, like there's been some close calls or some other things going on. And so that's why you're sort of bringing this up. And so you want to take any of these instances, especially any that the school happened to have documented in an email to you or any other kind of paperwork, and bring that and add that to, remember, like I was talking earlier, right? We build a case. So we think about like, what's all the stuff that we can kind of throw in to say, hey, this is what my child needs. And so that's what you do. You sort of build your case. Let's see here. And let me have a poke around. And I will look that information up for the medical information. And then that way you'll have it, and then you'll know. Because like I said, I really do think this is very handy to know and to have. And I know I posted it again in the group several times. So I hope if you haven't considered doing this, that you do. And I know I even had a parent, it was really funny. She went to get this done for her son because her son is a known bolter, right? He bolts. Joseph, go to your bedroom. Now, if you're done, go to your room. So he bolts, and she went and she tried to go and get the doctor to put in this medical code, and they argued with her, and they told her there was no such thing. And so I gave her the link that I just posted here in the group, and the link is to the CDC's own website, which I thought was really funny because I'm like, print this off and you take it in there and you see what they have to say. It's the CDC's own site, like how are you going to argue with the CDC site? As a matter of fact, the one I gave you was actually for autism, but here's the CDC site. So this is what I initially shared. Anyways, it was very funny because these medical doctors were arguing with her, and I'm like, no, go take this stuff in because this is just downright silly. But let's see. Cozy Cat, she had another comment here, and she said, my little guy has a temporary IEP too. Like, what's a temporary IEP? I've never even heard of that. What is that? And so the district said they cannot get his evaluation done in time. So the date, I guess, supposed to be on the IEP is a year out. Is this typical? No, it's not. I mean, to the point, like I've never even heard of that. And I said, I hesitate to sign it for I fear the district will not change it post-evaluation. Can I sign and put a disclaimer on it stating that it's temporary? You could, but I'm not sure they would do you any good. So, because legally they may look at it as an IEP. And she says she's in Minnesota. Now, I'll have to do a bit of research because, again, I've never heard of this. And when you say temporary, are you saying, because you said that they couldn't get his evaluations done in time. So did they send something home to you to have you sign to give them an extension on the evaluation date? And if so, by how much? Because I have to say I'm a bit curious at this point because, again, I've never heard of a temporary IEP, and I will tell you for certain, right? There is absolutely zero things in the law talking about temporary IEPs. At least I believe so. There is a lot of law. So I will tell you that under IDEA and all the little sub-regulations and everything else, there's a lot to cover. But I can't say in all the time that I have been practicing special education advocacy, which is about 7.5 to 8 years, I have ever heard of a temporary IEP. Yeah, I'm going to have to look a little more into that because as I said, I do find this really interesting. And I never have heard of it. All right. So, and I did find the correct ICD code for wandering because the link that I had initially, it's old. So, anyways, let me think here. Where was I? So, Kat was saying no extension. Well, they had to have given you an extension or they're already out of compliance. So again, that's even more curious as to what you have going on because, the law under IDEA is very specific. It isn't like there's a whole lot of flexibility going on in this. It's very specific and your state has very specific rules. And there's specific law, right, that also kind of maybe dictates part of the process. And I highly doubt there's anything in there talking about a temporary IEP. But now I'm curious, so I will look some more into this and get back with you. It's not often somebody asks me a question of something that I don't know off the top of my head. And so Jackie's just saying she's only heard of a temporary one in relation to a transfer IEP. And see, I hadn't even heard of that because according to the law, right, you have the school district when you transfer. If you're in state, then the incoming school really should accept the IEP that was written for your child at the previous district as is. If you're transferring across state lines, all right, it's a little different. So they can take some time, but they have 30 days. And they're supposed to do as many of the things and services that are in your child's current IEP. They're supposed to be doing all of that for your child for that 30 days. And then during that 30 days, they can conduct any other assessments that they're wanting to conduct. And then once all of that is done, they then decide, what they're keeping out of the IEP that was incoming, or maybe nothing, right? And then based on their assessments, what it is that they're now going to offer services for the child. And they should have that wrapped up within 30 days. So again, I really haven't heard of a temporary IEP, but at least Jackie has. And like I said, that doesn't conform with law and what the law says when you're talking about state-to-state transfers or in-state transfers of IEPs. So Sarah's saying your kitten sounds so cute. Yeah, those are adult female cats in my house, probably. That's probably the mom, and she's sitting there trilling to her kittens. because they're a handful. Have you ever tried to herd kittens? It's difficult. And I was going to say, it was like me herding my children when they were little. There wasn't much herding going on. It was suggestions, right? So Cozy said, so we had a child study meeting, and then the district said they could not get his evaluation done prior to his end date of his IEP. Okay, so if you are already, okay, and made me come in for an IEP meeting to cover the gap. He has been in the same school since kindergarten, and his IEP date is at the end of April. All right, so I'm still a little confused as to what's going on, because it sounds like does your child, Cozy, already have an IEP? Like, so they had one, right? And if they already had one, then the school should be aware of what the assessment window is. They need to get something complete before they lapse into noncompliance. And then you said, so the district came in. So his current IEP, is it good until April? Is that what you're saying? Like, and they're thinking they're going to go past that already? Is that what you're saying with that? So she said, yes, he does have an IEP already. So what they're worried about is not getting his evaluations done before his next IEP date is, and that they would be out of compliance. I think that's what's going on, from what I can tell. So Michelle was saying, wouldn't a temporary IEP new without testing fall under predetermination? We'll see. This is kind of what I mean, right? Like, I've never heard of anything like this, and it's just really weird. But it sounds like it's a reevaluation, right? Because you already have an IEP in place. So we're just reevaluating the child and trying to figure out what they should be having, or what their level of service should be. And so that's what it sounds like is going on, I think, maybe, right? And then Cozy was saying yes. So that's what I'm thinking is going on. So technically, his IEP, there shouldn't be a temporary IEP. So IEP, this is where everything gets confusing, okay? So IEPs don't go out of date. They don't. Now, there is kind of an expiration, right? And what I mean by an expiration is that by law, it says that once a year, you are supposed to reevaluate and reassess. So let me rephrase that. Got to be careful when we don't want to confuse terms, right? So you have 1 year to come back and sort of revisit the IEP. And what we're doing is we're looking at the goals. Did the child make progress, right? Are they meeting their goals? Do they need new goals? And when I say new goals, like they didn't meet their goals, so we need to modify and make a new one, or like we need an all new goal, something they haven't done before. So by law, they're required to revisit the IEP every year. They're required to reevaluate every 3 years, but they can reevaluate as often as once a year. All right, so this is, again, this kind of, we're supposed to, but if you don't, it's okay, because the IEP that you have now stays active until you meet and make a new IEP. So you don't need a temporary one. The one that you have now should stay in effect. They're just now in non-compliance. That's what they're trying to do, okay? What they're telling you is, we already know that we're going to be in non-compliance. So we're trying to fix it and hide that fact by giving you this temporary IEP. That's what they're doing, okay? And then Michelle was just saying, they told me the same thing. The end of 4th grade, last day of the school, they had me sign and never tested until we moved to a new school. And so I'm Cozy, kind of going back to what we've been talking about, said yes, he needs a different diagnosis as he turns 7. He can no longer be classified DCD Not sure quite what that is because that's probably state specific, but I'm sure it's something like developmental delay. And yes, because developmental delay, federally speaking, a child can only have that up until the day that they turn 9. But a state may take that term and kind of break it down or have a different age. And usually it's something younger, that a child can be diagnosed as developmentally delayed before kind of hitting that age and then requiring another diagnosis. And I say diagnoses, again, bad Michelle, because that's not correct. It is a special education classification based on one of the 13 categories under IDEA, right? It's not literally a diagnosis the way you think of as a medical diagnosis, because again, very different, right? There are medical diagnoses and there are educational categories for special education under IDEA. That's what the school is doing. Medical diagnosis, something different. So that's why it gets other people confused, because they're like, hey, my child has medical autism. They should have educational autism. Not necessarily. It's, do they meet the educational criteria of autism? And so you have to look and see, you know, like, what's your state's definition for educational autism? It may be the federal definition, or your state may have refined it a bit. And so have something a little different. And if that's the case, then you really need to know that information. And again, if you're in the IEP group, I can help you there. And that's something that I often do. I help people find the information that's relevant for their state and their situation. So, and then Cozy clarified, so this DCD is developmental cognitive delay. And basically it's still developmental delay. And then often those children go on to be reclassified as either autism or intellectual delay. Now, not always, but often they're reclassified into one of those two categories. And so depending on your state, and I think you said it was Minnesota, I mean, I can go back through, but I can help you with those if you are unsure of what the eligibility, the educational eligibility criteria for Minnesota is on autism and intellectual delay. Then you can read it. And then as the parent, you should help determine, right, and decide what category of those two do you think he belongs in. Because again, you should come in with your own ideas into the IEP meeting. You shouldn't let, you know, the team, all the people across from you who have credentials, you know, just because they have credentials, they're not credentialed in your child, okay? So you should walk in knowing your child and have read these two eligibility categories and say, I think my child is this one or this one, and here's why. And here's the information I brought to help prove that point. So just something to be aware, because that's how it works, okay? All right, so Michelle was saying, can you discuss transitioning 5th to 6th grade? And then like what questions to ask. So I'm assuming you're talking about kind of going from elementary school to middle. And then, because that's a huge transition, right, from one to the other. And then also there's a huge transition from, of course, middle school to high school. And then again, a huge transition right after high school and potentially going to college or some kind of trade or career. So in the group, in the IEP group, you can find all that information just by searching the term hashtag transition. So usually I have them as transitions. I know that I just recently posted information in a couple of flyers that really kind of flesh out and discuss what it is that you want to ask, or some of the things you want to have or potentially include or even do. Like one of them is go visit the new school, right? So before school lets out, take time to take your child to the middle school and let them go tour the school and have the principal, you know, meet your child, give them a tour, have them, you know, try to help understand like what a day in middle school looks like. Have them hear the bell go off, have them out and being able to experience sort of the chaos of, you know, the hallway and this transitioning to classes. So they understand, you know, what are some potential sensory triggers in that situation. If your child is full of anxiety, it's good to know these things in advance before they show up at the middle school and are stuck in a hallway full of crowded pubescent children. I mean, like, that's not a great time for you to figure out that your child has severe anxiety issues over that. So it's really good to give them that chance to go and experience that, at least for a little while, like what it is, go to the lunchroom. What is it like in the lunchroom? Is it super loud? Is it super quiet? How is that different from the lunchroom where they're at now? So again, these are all kind of important things for your child to kind of know and experience before they even show up at middle school. You can ask for other accommodations concerning, like transition across classes or other things. And again, I have these forms and I'll pull them up for you here in just a little bit, but they are, I think, really great to kind of help you sort of flesh out what it is that you may want to cover and make sure that you do when it comes to seeing your child make that leap in transition. So, all right. Let's see. So I think I have covered most of the things that have happened today in the group. So does anyone have any other questions this evening? I know this session, like many of our sessions, kind of run on the longer end, right? But I think these are really productive, and I like participating with you guys in the live chat. I hope that you find the evening and the time not only educational, but a time to kind of relax, right? Take a moment, learn something that you maybe didn't know, and will help you in the future at, not only advocate for your child, but to advocate for somebody else's child, right? In the end, that's always one of the things I'm really looking for, is to be able to educate really an army of parents to go forth and not only fight for your child, but once you finally kind of have your head above the water for a moment, for you to go, oh my goodness, there are other people who are drowning, and you know what? I can help them. All right. So Michelle said she'll take a look. And like I said, I'll post them here in a little bit, Michelle. And Sarah said, is repeating standardized tests a good way to measure academic progress? No, not really. And then she said, what is a good way to definitively measure progress besides informal teacher observations? So there are, so there's standardized tests, and that's what you were asking about. So standardized tests are more of, I'm trying to think. So like the WISC. The WISC would be a standardized test. Then there are tests that, like your state tests that your child does. That's technically a screener. I mean, they call it a big test, but it's technically a screener, and it's to see where children are, right? And the school is testing your child to get an idea of where they are academically, and you didn't have to sign any consent. So it's kind of the difference, like to tell if it's a screener or it's a more of an evaluation, because if it's an evaluation, the school needs you to sign a consent to release. So just be aware, like that's the difference between the two, right? And then there's really not a super good way. There are some assessments that you could use, and you can kind of repeat those. They have their response to intervention. And so there's like a lot of different response to intervention assessments that they're kind of low-level assessments, and they allow you to repeat them more frequently than once a year. A true evaluation, say like the WISC, it tells you can only repeat that once a year, and that's it. You can't do any more than that. If you do, it invalidates the scores. And that's because there's sort of this learning curve that goes along with the assessment. So that's why you don't want to do that. And then there's also things that are like online assessments, like the DIBELS. That's the one that comes to mind because they use that here in Arizona. So there's a variety of potential things that you can do that are assessments that, to help you gauge where a child is, but it's not any kind of formal testing, and it's not just informal observation by the teacher. So, and then another important thing that you want to include in that goal, Sarah, is not just the informal observations by the teacher, but also to make sure that they are testing in different environments, that it's not all just like one-on-one, that they're doing some of these informal observations in the classroom setting. Because especially children who have attentional or sensory issues, right? They could do great one-on-one and they're like, oh yeah, they're doing wonderful and they're flying through, and they're doing this great job on their goal. And then you go and look at their stuff from school for their homework, things they're doing in class, and you're like, what the heck? And that's probably what's going on, is that they're being triggered sensory-wise and or their attention is divided. And so they just can't perform well enough in that crowded group setting. So just something to think about when you look at those things and you make your goals, because if that is an issue for your kid, you want to address that in the goal too, because the idea is to try to work the child to get to the point that they can integrate back into general education and won't need an IEP or 504 any longer. But then the child needs to be able to perform academically in that kind of classroom setting. So, as I said, something to keep in mind when you're thinking about that and you're generating goals. And I have a goal template in the group, and in my goal template, it also addresses that in there too. All right. So Michelle has a question, and she said, with Sarah's, and she says, does a child IQ stay the same their whole life? No. Interestingly enough, what happens is, and I saw this with my own children. So my children have autism. All three of them have autism. And it was really interesting because when they were preschool age, they were some of the smartest little whippersnappers you have ever seen, right? Even though Margaret had limited speech, she could speak. And when tested, she performed really well because she could regurgitate information that, was kind of like limited speech-wise. She could do that, but that was kind of the extent of her speech. And they assessed with their IQ as being high average. And I'm like, my children are geniuses. So, and they had some really interesting skills. And then 3 years later, I had them reassessed again. And their IQs pretty significantly dropped off 3 years later. And some of the things they had as really strong skills, they didn't have those as strong skills anymore. And some of it wasn't just that it wasn't a strong skill anymore, like now is a major weakness. It was really interesting, kind of like going back and looking at, after I did more investigation to even try to figure out like, what do these psychometric stuff mean, right? Then I went back and I sat down and kind of looked at the history of their scores over time. And I was looking at them and I'm like, there's some really weird stuff going on in here. And that was sort of what I noticed. And as time progressed, we got evaluated again. And in that next evaluation, again, their IQ dropped. Now, it didn't drop as drastically between the preschool and the over 5. So that first kind of adult assessment, because that's sort of the break too, by the way. And this is very important information, okay? Like most people don't tell you this. Most people don't know this. Most people don't realize this, but it's really important. So when schools or even neuropsychologists, psychologists, anybody who does psychometric assessments, okay, like the WISC-5, when they do these evaluations, there is one kind of evaluation. So like the WISC isn't before the age of 5. Before the age of 5, so 4 years, 11 months, right? Backwards, so younger. There are different assessments that are used. They're preschool assessments. And they're done differently. They're scored differently. And I think are more generous than the older assessments when they hit 5 and beyond. So if you have a choice and your child is due for an assessment, you want to try to wait until after they're 5, okay? Then get your assessment, because you want them to be out of that preschool age, and now you're doing the adult assessment. And usually these are a little more detailed. These are the ones that have the information of a functional IQ. They have working memory, processing speed. They have, not to say the preschool doesn't have some of the information, but I don't think the scores are as good or crystallized, or I don't know. They just don't seem to be as representative of the child once they hit 5 and they do these other psychometric testing. And like my children, you see this really big gap that's going on. And you're like, wow, my children are actually further behind than I was thinking. And I was going to say, don't let that overly concern you, because like my children, one of my children has an IQ technically of 68. But that boy is very smart and he's quite functional. My daughter has an IQ, I believe, of 82. And so she's just right into the average range. And she functions quite well. So the fact that their IQ is lower, don't let that worry you. It's more important they have good adaptive skills. And again, if you don't know what adaptive skills are, please take the time to read my blog post, because I have one of those too for adaptive skills. And I found a really good resource and was able to use it to discuss what are relevant adaptive skills in particular in the educational environment. So if your child doesn't do these things, these are things that can be done in the educational environment. But normally what happens is they'll test a lot higher at the preschool level, and then you'll have that first younger testing, and you'll notice it's lower than the preschool level, but it may still be in a decent range. And then you'll get them tested again sometime around 7 or 8, 9, right? Depending on when your last assessment was. And at that one, usually whatever that IQ says, that's pretty much going to be what they considered your crystallized IQ. Like from here on out, you should test right about the same IQ level. And so it really doesn't change much after that. So just so you know. So yeah, Michelle was talking about that his IQ dropped 8 points. I think mine dropped 12. So this is part of what I was talking about. It's very common to see that drop in the IQ, and then you'll probably see it again. And the reason why is, when you think about it for a minute, it makes sense, because the children, as they're getting older, right, are expected to kind of pick up their pace of learning exponentially. And our children can't do that, and they can't keep up. And that's where you run into the problem, because now everybody else, their learning is picking up at this really fast pace, and our kids just can't do that. So relatively speaking, they fall, and then you see that in the IQ score. Let's see. So sometimes it can be the opposite, which is true, by the way. So she said it depends on the ability to test and the true ability. And that's very true if you're getting all of your testing done through the school. So Jackie makes a really good point. And I don't know, and she didn't say here specifically whether that was done through the school or not. But you absolutely can have bad tests, and especially bad assessments through the school. And one of the things that I do is I commonly look at these psychometric assessments for people and sort of rip them apart, with the idea being that you're going to now take this and you're going to go and ask for an IEE because the assessment that was done so poorly, or the assessment that was done wasn't just done poorly, but it wasn't even the right assessment. Matter of fact, one of the ones that I did when I looked it up online, the child was too old to even be doing that assessment. That assessment never should have even been given to the child. So that invalidated the scores from that assessment. There was another one I saw in which a child had been given the WISC-5, and I think it was 7 months apart.
Wow.
And so that second set of test scores the school did for the WISC-5 completely invalidated. And, you know, in the school's report, the school psychologist says these are complete invalid. No, they're not, because the WISC-5 was done again too closely. And again, there is that learning curve, right? I was just looking at also the confidence interval, right? So there is this confidence interval associated with psychometric test scores. And when that happens, they don't look at those confidence intervals. So like the range, okay, so people ask me about this quite a bit. They ask about CI. Boys, go away, please, now. So they ask about CI. And when I say CI, when I'm talking about psychometric assessments, what I mean is the confidence interval. And so what the confidence interval is, it's saying that on, you know, this is a snapshot of the child, that on this given day, at this given time, your child made X score for this test. But if we gave your child this test tomorrow, your child may score this score. And then the day after that, they may score this score. And so basically, they can statistically figure out what's called a confidence interval, a range that on any given day, your child should test within this range. So what schools often do is your child is at, say, a standard score of 25, because often these are reported in standard scores. Well, 25 is the very bottom of the average. So they will write 25 and then they'll write average, and they don't discuss the confidence interval, okay? And if you look at the confidence interval in the testing, it definitely would dip down into the low average. Also, you're allowed to take into consideration the confidence interval of testing, but you don't ever really see those on school standardized tests, that, you know, the IEP testing stuff that you get. You just don't tend to see it. They don't bother with it. But you can find sample reports of the psychometric tests online, and then you'll see if it has a confidence interval or not. And if it does, then you can calculate a confidence interval for that psychometric evaluation. So these are all just some things to consider, because I have been able to help parents argue that their child did have a specific learning disability just because they tested average with 25 across the board in their standard scores. That didn't mean they didn't have a learning disability. So, all right. So anyways, Michelle was just saying, yep, I saw that, Jackie said, with mine in second grade. So she was talking about how the IQ score actually rose. And Jackie was just saying hers were both for private neuropsych. So that's interesting, because usually private testing, they do better. Like they choose better psychometric exams, and they just tend to do a better job in general. So Jackie also said, yes, I've seen it due to poor testing also, of course. And again, it's very common for, I guess, like psychometric scores and testing to be a bit sloppy when they put these reports together. So Michelle was saying, how do we know which WISC number is at which grade? So the WISC-5 is the current test out. It's the latest version of the WISC. This is the 5th version. And it has nothing to do with grade. All psychometric tests have age ranges. That's what you're looking for. You're looking at the age range. So for the WISC, it's like 5 to, and I don't remember if it was like 91 or 99, or you look it up online, right? But it's like quite elderly. So the WISC has a large range, but it didn't start until 5. And then the pool said generally there is a 15 plus point margin of error. How would one consider that? So yes, often you will see a standard deviation. So that's what you're talking about. If you have 15 to 20 points difference in an area, you would look at it as a full standard deviation of difference in the scores. And so schools can't use that to determine specific learning disabilities alone. So that's called like the discrepancy model. And it used to be the only way pretty much a lot of states would determine a specific learning disability. But law has come out and said, no, they can't do that. They can't use a specific learning disability as the only way, or a discrepancy score difference as the only way to determine a specific learning disability. So, so Zena was just saying, my school psych said she couldn't test for disabilities. That's probably fairly accurate. I mean, like in specifics, right? That's probably correct. Because remember, I was talking earlier about medical diagnoses and educational eligibilities. Children, go to bed now. Sorry. They're deciding they're snacking and they're making a huge loud noise in there. All right. So anyways, so in the most literal of essence, right, they're correct. Because they're not doing any kind of testing for medical disabilities. I mean, that's what when people say disabilities, they're talking about medical disabilities. No, they're classifying people for special education purposes. So that's different. It's not any kind of disability. So no, she's not diagnosing disability. She's making decisions on classification for special education. That's what she's doing. So, I mean, it's a really fine line and it confuses the heck out of people. And then they rarely ever explain that to you. So how would you ever know, right? If nobody took the time to explain. So Michelle is saying, thank you. Well, you're welcome. I hope that answered your question. So Sarah said, when scheduling an IEP meeting, shouldn't I be notified of everyone in attendance before the meeting? Absolutely. Are they inviting people to your meeting and they're not telling you? Like they're just extra mysterious guests. Hi, Diego. How are you? He's joining me on YouTube over here. Anyways, though, yes, you were supposed to be notified of all people who are in attendance, who are coming to your IEP meeting. And you should have it every time, because every time you are given a notice to sign off on, like what it is that you're supposed to be meeting about, right? Like, so there's the literal who belongs on the IEP team. If I have to tell you to go to bed again, this is going to cause a huge problem for you. Now. Now. See, y'all are not alone. Seriously, this is what it's like dealing at my house. Yelling cats, noisy children. Okay. So anyways, you should be notified every time. Those who are essentially coming to your IEP meeting should be on the notice that you're receiving for the IEP meeting. So I don't know why they keep adding people, I guess, to your meeting. And she said, I'm only given an email with the day and time and if I can make it. Okay, well, so if you can't make it, when you respond back, make sure you give them 3 dates and times in which are, like reasonably good for you. And don't forget, because I did bring this up recently and somebody did not realize this, but do know you can absolutely attend an IEP meeting over the phone. So you can call into an IEP meeting. You don't need to physically be there. And I really highly recommend parents who have anxiety issues to consider doing that, because I have to say, even for me, like I find it a lot less anxious. I am a lot less anxious if I am not sitting across 8 people from me, right? And then it's nice because I can sit at my computer, and then as we're having this meeting, I can sit here and be typing. I can look up law. I can sit here and look up other information. I can look up state information. And then I wind up notifying the team of what it is that I'm finding. And it's been really nice to be able to kind of pull that information up on the fly. Also realized video conferencing potentially is available too, but I find just, over the phone, I call in and they have some kind of conference there, I think works great. So, so Zena was saying, okay, and yes, they don't explain that, so thank you. Well, you're welcome. And Vipu, the V Paul, I think I said that right. I'm having an enunciation problem. Anyways, he was saying thank you. So I hope that helped answer your questions. And then Sarah said, it's the same people. So she said, but we moved the last elementary school my son attended. I was given a form to sign and a few days before the meeting. And this current school, I don't get any form, just an email. Well, that's really interesting because they are supposed to send you an invitation essentially to the IEP meeting. And I find that interesting. They don't send you any paperwork at all for that. And they try to go paperless, I guess, is what their intent is. But again, there is law on who, when you have an actual IEP meeting, on who must be in attendance at that IEP meeting. So this isn't optional. Like, to have a true IEP meeting, you need to have at minimum these people in place. And so I'm going to copy and paste the law here. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But it's important because if you are having a true conversation, and you're wanting a formal IEP meeting, then this is something that you have to have these people present to have a proper meeting. So just something to be aware of, because again, I don't think most people are. All right. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you a link to the law. All right. Let's see now. Okay. All right. So Zena was saying, yes, I had my IEP meeting today. They wanted to bring in the assistant principal because I was being a mom friend. So who was really helpful because she took great notes. Oh, so she brought in a friend of hers to take notes. And so that allowed her to focus. And I get that because sometimes it's really hard to write and pay attention while you're trying to argue. And so because she brought a friend, then the assistant principal came and sat in. I don't think that's such a bad thing, really, right? I guess it depends on, is the assistant principal very helpful in the meeting? So, and then Zena was saying, yes, it can be intimidating. Absolutely. It's very intimidating to sit across from a bunch of people. And then Sarah said, last meeting, I emailed the day before to say that I was bringing my son's ABA therapist. And at the meeting, she started off saying, I needed to email her at least 2 days before I'm bringing anyone extra so they are aware. Well, if that's the case, and they wind up, and I hope you have that in email, because if that's the case, and they wind up inviting somebody to your meeting that you did not have notice of 2 days beforehand, then when they show up at the meeting, you're going to have to tell them, I'm going to have to cancel this meeting because I wasn't giving notice that you were coming, and I require 2 days notice before the meeting, just as you require me to give you 2-day notice before I bring anyone else. And so therefore, we're going to need to reschedule this. That's what I would do. And then make sure everybody knew why you were doing that. Because that's ridiculous, and you're allowed to bring whoever you want. And by law, you're absolutely allowed to bring whoever you want, and it says so in the law. So just so you know. So they give you a hard time, you can always pull that out too. Let's see. So Sarah was saying everybody signs a form at the actual meeting who is in attendance. Just thinking I should be aware before the meeting. Okay, so here's why you should be told of who's supposed to be at the meeting before the actual meeting. because under IEP, that same law that I gave you just a little bit ago about who is supposed to be in the IEP team meeting, the law also says this part, and it says the IEP team attendance. So it says a member of the IEP team described in the paragraphs, and it lists the law up above, right? At this section is not required to attend an IEP meeting in whole or in part if the parent gives a written excuse. The parent has to, in writing, excuse you from the meeting. Well, you can't excuse somebody from the meeting you didn't know was supposed to be in attendance in the first place. Now, can you? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So you really should be notified in advance of who is supposed to be in the meeting. Let's see here. So the pool said, what's your thought for a 6-year-old has a fluid reasoning score of 62? Does the score change? He has been diagnosed with a language disorder. If his fluid reasoning is that low, because a 62 is fairly low, what that means is they have a really hard time of thinking of kind of like flexible thinking and coming up with, it's called a novel solution, but it's just sort of this new way of doing something, right? And if that's impaired, it makes it really difficult to learn some very important things. And often what I have seen in my own son, because my son James, who is the most cognitively advanced of my children, he actually has the lowest fluid reasoning score of my children. Even my child who has an IQ of 68, he has a higher fluid reasoning score than my son James, who has like an IQ of 92. So it's really weird. I mean, like, I think it's really weird because you would think the higher IQ would have also a higher fluid reasoning score, but not always. So there are definitely certain learning disabilities that are absolutely tied to having a lower fluid reasoning score. And I wrote a post called Fluid Reasoning, What Does It Mean? Because like you, I was trying to understand, like, what does a low score in fluid reasoning mean? And how does that impact my child? And then how does that impact my child's learning, right? Because that's what I care about, is how does it impair my child's learning? And so now that I have researched and wrote this post about it, I find that there's a lot of things now that make sense. And like one of the things that my son really struggles with is math. And you need fairly good fluid reasoning to do math well. And so that's one of the areas. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if your child wound up having a learning disability in math, which is dyscalculia. And I also, on AESA's blog, have a post on dyscalculia too. So if you were interested in reading that, you can find that on the blog too. Okay. Let me see here, and then we are at, okay, so Sarah was saying thank you. So I think I've resolved Sarah's questions for the evening, so that's really good. All right, so does anyone else have any questions this evening? And then Nellie, I haven't forgotten about you in New Jersey, so I will post some links here in just a little bit, and I will post the links here for the IEE rules in New Jersey, okay? I do have some information on that. All right, let's see. Oh, good. So Paul was saying that so far he's doing good on maths, and if that's the case, that's excellent. Hopefully that trend will continue. But you will find that blog post, I think, quite interesting to read on fluid reasoning. So Michelle said they did that to me, said a general ed teacher would be there, but sent the librarian as a rep. And I flipped a lid because I was expecting a 5th grade teacher. So be careful and watch who they invite. The librarian was useless besides saying my kid was fun. No, the librarian is not considered a member of the IEP team that's needed to be there, because I'm assuming they were supposed to be, like she said, filling the role of the general ed teacher, but no, unless they're credentialed as a general education teacher, they cannot fulfill the role of a general ed teacher. I mean, how are they going to be able to do that? They don't teach general education. I mean, the purpose of the role is to have somebody who's familiar with general education so that they can speak on like the things that are required for general education. I mean, like that's the whole purpose. And so the librarian obviously cannot do that and can't address that. So I don't know. I don't get that. That's just really, I don't know. I think it's really weird. Okay. So our video is definitely running quite long tonight. It's about time to go. I hope you guys had a great evening, and I hope you learned something new. Do try to make it over to the Facebook channel the YouTube channel if you have not, and see if you can find the YouTube channel and where the live video is. Because again, I'm going to try to migrate the videos over to YouTube. In general, the controls and everything are a lot better on YouTube than they are on Facebook. Plus, I'm still having some issues with glitchiness with Facebook. I don't know if you guys are experiencing it, but as an admin of a group, I have been. And so I'm just kind of, stepping off of just using Facebook as the only platform and medium. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to unveiling our new website coming soon. Our AESA .group website. A brand new one should be up here shortly after the first part of April. So I'm really excited to have you guys come see our new website. I think it'll be great, and we'll have a forum, and I'm hoping to also have a podcast up and running soon and a bunch of other stuff going on. Like we had all sorts of really cool things in the process. All right. You guys have a good evening, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.